Eleanor Whitehawk froze mid-step in her living room doorway, grocery bags slipping from trembling fingers as canned soup rolled across hardwood floors. There, stretched across Sarah's old spot on the faded blue sofa, lay a wild bobcat wearing a pink collar, the exact shade of her daughter's favorite dress from 40 years ago. The animal's golden eyes met hers without fear, almost with recognition. Robert's coffee mug shattered against the kitchen tile behind her, the crash echoing through their tomb-quiet house like a gunshot. "Eleanor, don't move," he whispered, but his wife was already stepping forward, tears streaming down weathered cheeks. The bobcat remained perfectly still, tail flicking once against the same cushion where 7-year-old Sarah had curled up that final morning, clutching her stuffed rabbit and humming lullabies. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as decades of grief collided with impossible hope. "Call animal control," Robert breathed, reaching for his phone with shaking hands, but Eleanor's voice cut through the suffocating silence like a prayer. No! What miracle had delivered this wild creature to their doorstep, and what would it cost them to believe again? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Whitehawk house had become a mausoleum long before the bobcat arrived. Eleanor stood in the doorway, studying the creature that had somehow found its way into their carefully preserved shrine to loss. At 69, she carried herself like someone who had been holding her breath for 4 decades. Her silver hair still braided the way Sarah used to love, her hands perpetually reaching for a child who would never again run into her arms. 40 years, she whispered to the bobcat, who regarded her with an intelligence that made her chest ache. 40 years? I've been waiting for someone to come home. The house told their story in painful detail. Sarah's bedroom remained untouched. A 7-year-old's paradise frozen in time with fairy tale books splayed open on the bed, crayons scattered across a half-finished drawing of their family. The refrigerator still displayed Sarah's artwork, the colors long faded, but Eleanor's hope stubbornly intact. Even the growth chart penciled on the kitchen doorframe stopped abruptly at 3 feet 2 inches, marking the exact height Sarah would never exceed. Robert emerged from the kitchen, his weathered face pale beneath his graying beard. At 72, the former forest ranger moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned that the world could steal everything precious in a single afternoon. His hands, once steady enough to track wounded animals through miles of wilderness, now shook as he processed the impossible scene before him. "This isn't normal, Ellie," he said, using the nickname that had once made her smile. "Wild animals don't just walk into houses and make themselves at home." But Eleanor was remembering other impossible things. How Sarah had always claimed she could talk to animals. How their daughter had spent hours in the backyard whispering secrets to squirrels and rabbits that would sit perfectly still as if actually listening. How Sarah had begged for a cat every birthday and Christmas, promising she would love it forever and ever. The bobcat stretched languidly, displaying the distinctive tufted ears and spotted coat that marked her as pure wilderness. Yet something in her posture suggested domestication, an ease with human presence that defied everything Robert knew about wild felines. When she yawned, revealing impressive canine teeth, Eleanor felt no fear, only a strange sense of completion, as if a missing piece of her heart had finally clicked into place. "Look at her collar," Eleanor breathed, pointing to the faded pink band around the animal's neck. The fabric was worn thin, as if it had been cherished for a very long time. Robert squinted at the collar, his expression shifting from alarm to confusion. "That's not a tracking collar, that's—" He paused, the words catching in his throat as memories surfaced unbidden. "It's the same color as Sarah's dress," Eleanor finished, her voice barely audible. "The one she was wearing when—" The bobcat's ears swiveled toward them at the mention of that name, and for one impossible moment, Eleanor could have sworn she saw recognition flicker in those golden eyes. The first night passed in a surreal haze of whispered conversations and stolen glances. Eleanor had insisted they let the bobcat stay, her voice carrying a steel that Robert hadn't heard since before Sarah's disappearance. "She's not hurting anyone," Eleanor had argued, her arms crossed defensively. "Look at her, Robert. Really look. Does she seem dangerous to you?" The animal had indeed seemed anything but threatening. After that initial moment of recognition, she had simply curled up on the sofa as if she belonged there, occasionally lifting her head to observe their movements but showing no signs of aggression or fear. When Robert had cautiously approached with a bowl of water, she had accepted it with what could only be described as gratitude, her rough tongue lapping delicately at the rim. By morning, they had discovered something that stopped Eleanor's heart entirely. The bobcat had left the living room sometime during the night and made her way upstairs. Robert found her the next morning, curled up in the exact center of Sarah's bed, her spotted fur stark against the faded pink comforter that still smelled faintly of childhood dreams and strawberry shampoo. "Jesus Christ," Robert breathed, standing frozen in the doorway of his daughter's room. The sight hit him like a physical blow. This wild creature nestled among Sarah's stuffed animals, her head resting on the same pillow where his little girl had once whispered bedtime prayers. Eleanor pushed past him, her breath catching as she took in the scene. The bobcat's eyes opened slowly, fixing on Eleanor with that same uncanny awareness. For a long moment, woman and animal regarded each other in the sacred space of their shared loss. "She knows," Eleanor whispered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Somehow she knows about Sarah." The second day brought their first real test. Mrs. Patterson from next door had spotted the unusual houseguest through the kitchen window and wasted no time spreading the news through Pinewood Falls' gossip network. By noon, their phone was ringing constantly. Concerned neighbors, curious reporters, and increasingly insistent officials from animal control. "Eleanor, you can't keep a wild animal in your house," Sheriff Jim Crow explained during his obligatory visit, though his tone lacked conviction. He'd known the Whitehawks for 30 years, had been part of the search teams that combed every inch of Montana wilderness looking for Sarah. "I understand what you're going through, but this isn't safe." The bobcat had positioned herself between Eleanor and the sheriff during his visit, her golden eyes never leaving his face. She made no threatening moves, but her protective stance was unmistakable. "She's not just any wild animal, Jim," Eleanor replied, her hand resting gently on the bobcat's head. "She chose us. She could have gone anywhere, but she came here. She came home." That afternoon brought another discovery that left them both speechless. Eleanor had been showing the bobcat Sarah's photo albums, talking to her as if she could understand every word. When she opened to Sarah's 7th birthday party, the last one they'd celebrated, the bobcat's reaction was immediate and profound. She pressed her nose against the photograph, then looked directly at Eleanor and made a sound that was neither growl nor purr, but something achingly close to a sob. "She remembers," Eleanor breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Look at her, Robert. She remembers our baby." Robert wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, as his wife's desperate need to find meaning in tragedy, projecting human emotions onto a wild animal. But he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The bobcat's behavior defied everything he knew about feline psychology. She responded to Sarah's name, sought out objects that had belonged to their daughter, and seemed to understand the profound grief that permeated their home. The third day brought a moment that changed everything. Eleanor had been having one of her difficult mornings, the kind where the weight of 40 years of unanswered questions pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She'd been sitting in Sarah's rocking chair, clutching her daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit, when the memories became too much to bear. That's when the bobcat did something impossible. She approached Eleanor slowly, deliberately, and gently took the stuffed rabbit from her hands. For a moment Robert thought she might destroy it, but instead she carried it to Sarah's toy chest and carefully placed it inside, then returned to Eleanor and rested her head in her lap. "She's taking care of me," Eleanor whispered, her voice full of wonder as she stroked the animal's soft fur. "Just like Sarah used to do when I was sad." That evening, as they sat in their living room watching the bobcat groom herself with meticulous care, Eleanor made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. "We're keeping her," she announced, her voice steady and sure. "I don't care what anyone says. She's family now." Robert looked at his wife, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes held a spark of life he'd thought lost forever. "What do we call her?" he asked quietly. Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Luna," she said, "because she came to us in our darkest night." The knock on their door came at exactly 2:17 p.m. on the fourth day, sharp and authoritative in a way that made Robert's blood run cold. Through the peephole, he could see a tall man in a khaki uniform, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. Behind him stood two other officials, their expressions grim and businesslike. "Mr. Whitehawk, I'm Warden Marcus Blackwood with Montana Fish Wildlife Parks. We need to discuss the exotic animal you're harboring." Eleanor appeared at Robert's shoulder, Luna padding silently behind them. The bobcat seemed to sense the threat, her ears flattening slightly as she positioned herself protectively between Eleanor and the door. Robert opened it slowly, his jaw tight. "Warden." Blackwood was younger than Robert had expected, perhaps 52, with graying temples and eyes like winter steel. His uniform was immaculate, his posture military straight, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. "Folks, I'm going to cut right to the chase. You're in possession of a wild bobcat without proper permits, and that's a federal offense. This animal needs to be removed from your home immediately." "She's not hurting anyone," Eleanor said, stepping forward despite Robert's restraining hand on her arm. "She's been nothing but gentle. Look at her. Does she look dangerous to you?" Blackwood's gaze shifted to Luna, who had settled into a sitting position, her tail curled neatly around her paws. For a moment something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or something darker. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't understand what you're dealing with. This particular animal escaped from an illegal breeding operation 6 months ago. She's been involved in several incidents." "What kind of incidents?" Robert demanded, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Property damage, livestock kills, and—" Blackwood paused, his jaw working, as if chewing on words he didn't want to swallow. "There was an attack on a child in Glacier County. 8-year-old boy. He didn't survive." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat. "No, no, that's not. Luna wouldn't hurt a child. She sleeps in my daughter's bed. She's protective of children." "Your daughter?" Blackwood's eyes sharpened with interest. "How old is your daughter, Mrs. Whitehawk?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Robert felt Eleanor tremble beside him, felt the familiar weight of their shared tragedy settling over them like a shroud. "Our daughter would be 47 now," Robert said quietly. "If she were still alive. She was taken when she was 7, 40 years ago." Something shifted in Blackwood's expression, a crack in his official facade that revealed something raw and wounded underneath. "I see. And you think this animal is somehow connected to her?" "I know how it sounds," Eleanor said, her voice strengthening with desperate conviction. "But Luna knew exactly where Sarah's room was. She responds to her name. She protects me the same way Sarah used to. You can't tell me that's coincidence. Blackwood pulled a folder from his briefcase, spreading photographs across their porch railing. The images were brutal: torn livestock, destroyed property, and most damning of all, a small white cross in a cemetery with Timothy Blackwood carved into the stone. "This is my son," Blackwood said, his voice carefully controlled. "He was fascinated by wild animals just like your Sarah probably was. He thought he could befriend them. He was wrong." Eleanor stared at the photograph, her face pale but determined. "Luna isn't like that. She's different." That's what every victim's family believes until it's too late. Blackwood gathered the photos with mechanical precision. "I'm giving you 72 hours to arrange for this animal's removal. If you don't comply, I'll return with a federal warrant and tranquilizer guns. This is not negotiable." After he left, Eleanor and Robert sat in their kitchen in stunned silence. Luna had retreated to Sarah's room as if sensing the tension, and the house felt hollow without her presence. "What if he's right?" Robert said finally, his voice barely audible. "What if we're putting ourselves in danger? What if we're putting the neighbors' kids in danger?" "He's lying," Eleanor said fiercely, though her hands shook as she poured coffee. "Did you see his face when he talked about his son? He's not protecting anyone. He's punishing Luna for something that happened to his family." That evening, as they watched Luna play gently with one of Sarah's old toys, Robert couldn't shake Blackwood's words. The Bobcat was undeniably wild, her movements fluid and powerful in ways that reminded him constantly of her true nature. But there was something else. Something in the way she watched Eleanor, the way she seemed to anticipate their needs. 3 days, he said as they prepared for bed. He gave us 3 days. Eleanor was brushing her hair with the same silver brush she'd used for 40 years, her reflection in the mirror showing every line that grief had carved into her face. "Then we'd better figure out what we're going to do." Luna appeared in the doorway, her golden eyes moving between them as if she understood exactly what was at stake. When Eleanor patted the bed, the Bobcat jumped up and settled beside her, just as Sarah used to do during thunderstorms. "We're not giving her up," Eleanor whispered into Luna's fur. "I won't lose another daughter." Outside, a truck sat idling at the end of their street, its occupant watching their house with the patience of a predator waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. The morning of day 5 brought unexpected allies to their doorstep. Dr. Amanda Clearwater arrived at dawn, her veterinary bag clutched tightly in one hand and determination etched across her weathered face. She was a woman in her mid-60s who had spent her entire career treating both domestic and wild animals, and she'd driven 3 hours from Billings after hearing about their situation through the underground network of animal lovers that existed in rural Montana. "I'm not here officially," she told Eleanor as she examined Luna with gentle, experienced hands. "But I've seen the photos Warden Blackwood is showing around. This isn't the same animal that killed his son." Eleanor felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. "How can you be sure?" "Size, markings, behavior." Dr. Clearwater scratched Luna behind the ears, earning a contented purr. The animal that attacked Timothy Blackwood was male, much larger, with distinctive scarring across his face from territorial fights. "This is a young female, probably 18 months old, and she's been socialized with humans. Look at her coat. It's too clean, too well maintained for a truly wild animal." Robert leaned against the kitchen counter, his coffee growing cold in his hands. "So, where did she come from?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Dr. Clearwater's expression darkened. "I've been tracking reports of escaped exotic animals from illegal breeding operations. There was a raid 6 months ago on a place called Mountain Vista Exotic Ranch. They were breeding bobcats and other wild cats for private collectors and other purposes." "What other purposes?" Eleanor asked, though something in the veterinarian's tone made her stomach clench. "Canned hunts. rich men paying enormous sums to shoot captive-bred animals in enclosed spaces. The animals are released into fenced areas with no real chance of escape, and the hunters get their trophy without any of the skill or patience required for actual hunting. Dr. Clearwater's voice dripped with disgust. Several animals escaped during the raid. Luna was probably one of them. Eleanor sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. So, she's been alone for 6 months, surviving on her own, and learning to trust humans again after God knows what kind of treatment at that ranch. Dr. Clearwater completed her examination, her face grave. There's something else you need to know. She's pregnant. The words hit Eleanor like a lightning bolt. She stared at Luna, who was now stretched across Sarah's old coloring books, her slightly rounded belly suddenly obvious now that she knew what to look for. "How long?" Robert asked, his voice hoarse. "Based on her size and condition, I'd say she's about 4 weeks along." Bobcats have a gestation period of approximately 60 days, so you're looking at another month before the kittens arrive. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks, though she couldn't say whether they were from joy or terror. Kittens. She's going to have babies here. "Which complicates everything," Robert said grimly. "Blackwood won't just be taking Luna now. He'll be taking her babies too." That afternoon brought Father Miguel Santos, the elderly priest from St. Catherine's who had officiated Sarah's memorial service 40 years ago. He was a small man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly with age, but his voice still carried the authority of someone who had spent decades comforting the grieving. "I've been thinking about your situation," he told them as they sat in the living room, Luna curled contentedly at Eleanor's feet. "There are precedents for sanctuary, you know, not just for humans." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. "The church has a long history of providing sanctuary to those in need, and there are people, good people, who would be willing to help if it came to that." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tom Strongbear from the Blackfeet Reservation called me this morning. He says if Luna needs a place to go, tribal land has different jurisdiction. Federal agents can't just walk in and take her." Robert felt a spark of hope kindle in his chest. Would Tom really do that? Tom lost his granddaughter to a drunk driver last year. He understands what it means to lose a child, and he understands what it means to find something worth protecting. Father Miguel's eyes were warm with compassion. "But there's more. I've been making some calls. Warden Blackwood isn't as popular with his colleagues as he'd like people to believe." Eleanor looked up sharply. "What have you heard?" "Questions about his methods. Complaints about his enthusiasm when it comes to dealing with escaped exotic animals. There are people in the department who think he's let his personal grief cloud his judgment." The priest paused, choosing his words carefully. "His son's death wasn't entirely the animal's fault, Eleanor. Timothy had been feeding wild bobcats for months against his father's explicit orders. The attack happened when the boy tried to pet one during mating season. So Blackwood blamed the animals, instead of accepting that his son made a dangerous mistake," Robert said grimly. "Grief makes us do terrible things sometimes," Father Miguel replied. "But that doesn't excuse what he's doing to you now." That evening, as the sun set over the Montana mountains, Eleanor sat on the porch with Luna beside her, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and purple. Robert was inside, making phone calls to the network of supporters that seemed to be materializing out of nowhere. Retired rangers, wildlife rehabilitators, animal rights activists, and ordinary people who had heard their story and been moved to help. "You know," Eleanor said softly to Luna, "Sarah would have been so excited about your babies. She always said she wanted to be a mother when she grew up." She stroked the bobcat's fur, marveling at how soft it was. She would have named each one of them and made up stories about their adventures. Luna turned her golden eyes toward Eleanor, and for a moment the woman could have sworn she saw understanding there, even a kind of maternal warmth. The tranquil moment was shattered by the sound of gravel crunching under tires. A black SUV pulled into their driveway, and Eleanor's blood ran cold as she recognized Warden Blackwood behind the wheel. He wasn't alone this time. 2 other officials sat in the vehicle, and their body language suggested this wasn't a friendly visit. "Mrs. Whitehawk?" Blackwood called as he approached the porch, his voice carrying across the evening air. "We need to talk." Luna immediately tensed, her ears flattening against her head as she positioned herself between Eleanor and the approaching man. A low growl rumbled in her throat, the first truly wild sound Eleanor had heard her make. "It's okay, baby," Eleanor whispered, though her own heart was racing. "It's okay." Robert appeared in the doorway behind them, his presence solid and reassuring. "What can we do for you, Warden?" "I've received multiple reports of aggressive behavior from your animal," Blackwood said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "She was seen stalking children at the elementary school playground yesterday afternoon." Eleanor's mouth fell open. "That's impossible. Luna hasn't left our property." "She's been with us every minute." "Are you certain about that, Mrs. Whitehawk? Animals are clever. They can slip out without you noticing." Blackwood's smile was cold and calculated. "I'm afraid I can't wait for the full 72 hours. This animal is clearly an immediate threat to public safety." "You're lying," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with fury. "Luna was with me all afternoon yesterday. We never left the house." "Can you prove that?" Blackwood challenged. "Do you have witnesses? Video footage?" Robert stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "What's your real game here, Blackwood? Because this isn't about public safety." For a moment, the warden's mask slipped, revealing the raw grief and rage underneath. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. These animals are killers. They can't be trusted, no matter how tame they seem." "And I won't let another family go through what mine went through." Eleanor stood slowly, Luna rising with her, the pregnant bobcat's body coiled with protective tension. "Your son's death was a tragedy, Warden. But Luna didn't kill him. You can't punish her for something she didn't do." "Can't I?" Blackwood's hand moved to the tranquilizer gun holstered at his side. "I have federal authority here, and I have reports of aggressive behavior. That's all I need." The morning of the 7th day dawned gray and cold, as if the Montana sky itself was mourning what was about to unfold. Eleanor woke to find Luna restless and panting, her golden eyes wide with an anxiety that seemed to mirror her own. Throughout the night, the bobcat had been pacing Sarah's room, occasionally stopping to nose at the old toy chest or press her face against the window that overlooked their backyard. "Something's wrong," Eleanor whispered to Robert as they watched Luna's agitated behavior. The bobcat's breathing was labored, and she kept seeking out dark, enclosed spaces, under Sarah's bed, behind the rocking chair, inside the closet among the carefully preserved clothes. "Doctor." Clearwater arrived at first light, her face grim with purpose. After examining Luna, she pulled Eleanor and Robert aside, her voice urgent and low. "She's going into labor. The stress of the past few days has triggered early delivery. We need to keep her calm and quiet, but given the circumstances—" Her words were interrupted by the rumble of vehicles outside. Through the living room window, they could see a convoy approaching. 3 black SUVs, an animal control truck, and what appeared to be a federal transport vehicle equipped with heavy-duty cages. "Jesus Christ," Robert breathed, his face pale. "He brought an army." Eleanor's hands shook as she watched uniformed officers emerge from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and efficient. Blackwood stood among them, directing the operation with military precision. Several officers carried tranquilizer rifles while others unloaded nets and restraining equipment. "They're not just here to take Luna," Dr. Clearwater said grimly. "They're treating this like she's a dangerous wild animal that needs to be subdued by force." Luna seemed to understand the threat instinctively. Despite her labor pains, she positioned herself protectively in front of Eleanor, her body low and tense, every muscle coiled for defense. The growl that rumbled from her throat was primal and fierce, the sound of a mother preparing to fight for her life and the lives of her unborn young. The knock on the door was sharp and authoritative. Through the peephole, Robert could see Blackwood's face, cold and determined. Behind him, officers spread out across their property with practiced efficiency, cutting off any possible escape routes. "Open up, White Hawk! We have a federal warrant!" Eleanor's world seemed to tilt on its axis. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not another loss. Another child taken from her arms. "I won't let them," she whispered fiercely, dropping to her knees beside Luna. "I won't let them take another one of my babies." Robert opened the door slowly, his body blocking the entrance. "Let me see the warrant." Blackwood thrust the papers at him with barely concealed satisfaction. "Federal court order for the immediate seizure of one adult bobcat and any offspring. The animal is to be removed for public safety and transported to a federal holding facility." "She's in labor," Robert said desperately. "You can't move her now. It could kill her and the babies." "That's a risk we'll have to take." Blackwood pushed past Robert into the house, his officers following. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the animal." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes blazing with 40 years of accumulated grief and fury. "No. Ma'am, I'm not asking. I'm ordering you to move away from that animal immediately." "And I said no." Eleanor's voice carried a strength that surprised even herself. "You want her? You'll have to go through me." Luna contracted with a pained whimper, and Eleanor's heart broke as she saw the terror in the bobcat's eyes. This beautiful, gentle creature who had brought light back into their dark world was about to lose everything, just as they had lost Sarah. "Officers, remove the woman," Blackwood ordered coldly. That's when the miracle happened. The sound started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it grew steadily louder, car doors slamming, voices calling, footsteps on gravel. Through the living room windows, Robert could see people streaming onto their property, dozens of them, then more, forming a human barrier between the house and the federal vehicles. Mrs. Patterson from next door was there, despite her earlier threats to call authorities herself. Jim Crow, the local sheriff, stood with his arms crossed, his face set in stubborn determination. Father Miguel Santos walked among the crowd, offering quiet words of encouragement. Tom Strongbear had arrived with half the reservation, their presence adding a layer of jurisdictional complexity that would take hours to sort out. But what broke Eleanor's heart and filled it simultaneously were the faces she recognized from the past, former patients from her nursing days, now grown adults with children of their own. Sarah's old classmates, middle-aged now but carrying signs that read, "Let Luna stay," and "Some families choose each other." "What the hell is this?" Blackwood demanded, his composure finally cracking. "It's called community," Jim Crow said as he stepped into the house uninvited. "And last I checked, you need local cooperation for federal operations on non-federal land. Sheriff Crow, you're interfering with a federal investigation." "Am I? Looks to me like I'm responding to a domestic disturbance. Got multiple calls about federal agents threatening elderly residents." Jim's smile was sharp as a blade. "Seems like I better stick around and make sure everything's handled proper." Outside, the crowd had begun to chant Luna's name, their voices carrying through the morning air like a prayer. News vans were arriving, drawn by social media posts that had spread the word across Montana and beyond. Someone had live-streamed Blackwood's aggressive approach, and the video was already going viral with hashtags like #SaveLuna and #FamilyNotLaw. Dr. Clearwater pushed through the chaos to kneel beside Luna, her medical bag open. "I need everyone to be quiet," she said firmly. "This animal is giving birth, and all this stress and noise could cause serious complications." Luna was panting heavily now, her body working instinctively despite the chaos around her. Eleanor stroked her fur gently, whispering words of comfort the same way she had once reassured laboring mothers during her nursing days. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe. We're here. Your babies are going to be beautiful." Blackwood stood frozen in the middle of the room, his officers looking to him for direction. The crowd outside was growing larger by the minute, and the media attention was making everything infinitely more complicated. He couldn't forcibly remove a laboring animal surrounded by dozens of witnesses and live television coverage without looking like a monster. "Sir," one of his officers said quietly, "maybe we should wait until after." "No!" Blackwood snapped. "We have our orders." That's when Luna gave birth to her first kitten. The tiny creature slid into the world with a soft mew, perfect and impossibly small. Eleanor's tears flowed freely as she watched Luna instinctively clean her baby, her rough tongue gentle and thorough. The kitten was beautiful, marked with the same distinctive spots as its mother, but somehow more delicate, more precious. The room fell completely silent except for Luna's soft purring and the tiny sounds of new life. Even Blackwood seemed stunned by the primal beauty of the moment. "My God," one of his officers whispered. "She's just a mama having babies." The second kitten arrived minutes later, then the third, each one a perfect miracle of spotted fur and tiny paws. Luna gathered them close to her warmth, her fierce protectiveness now focused entirely on these small, helpless lives she had brought into the world. Eleanor looked up at Blackwood, her face wet with tears. "Look at her. Really look. Does she seem like a killer to you? She's a mother, just like I was once. Just like your wife probably was." For the first time since arriving, Blackwood's mask of authority completely crumbled. He stared at Luna and her newborn kittens, and Robert could see the man's own grief reflected in his eyes, the father who had lost his child and never learned how to stop punishing the world for that loss. "Sir," Sheriff Crow said quietly, "I think it's time we all took a step back and figured out what's really best for everyone involved here, including those babies." Outside, the crowd had fallen silent too, as if sensing the sacred nature of what was happening inside the little house on Maple Street. New life had entered the world, and in that moment it seemed like anything might be possible, even redemption for the wounded hearts that had brought them all to this point. The fragile peace that had settled over the White Hawk house after the births lasted exactly 18 hours. Eleanor woke on the 8th day to the sound of Luna's distressed cries echoing through Sarah's room, a sound that cut through her heart like shattered glass. She rushed upstairs to find the Bobcat pacing frantically, her 3 newborn kittens mewing helplessly in the makeshift nest Eleanor had prepared from Sarah's old blankets. "What's wrong, baby?" Eleanor whispered, but Luna's golden eyes were wild with panic, darting toward the window and back to her kittens. Her maternal instincts were screaming danger, though Eleanor couldn't see any immediate threat. Robert appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "There's a news van parked at the end of our street. Been there since 5 this morning. And Jim Crow just called. Federal marshals arrived in town an hour ago." The temporary victory they'd won through community support was crumbling. Eleanor sank onto Sarah's bed, watching Luna try desperately to move her babies to different hiding spots around the room. The stress was taking its toll on the new mother. She was barely eating, and her milk production was already showing signs of decreasing under the constant anxiety. "They're going to separate them," Eleanor said, her voice hollow with the familiar despair that had haunted her for 40 years. Luna knows it. She can sense what's coming. Dr. Clearwater arrived within the hour, her examination confirming Eleanor's worst fears. Luna's stress levels are dangerously high. If this continues, she could stop producing milk entirely, and the kittens won't survive. They're too young for bottle feeding. They need their mother. The death blow came at noon. Blackwood returned, but this time he wasn't alone. Federal marshals flanked him, their presence lending legal weight to what had previously been a jurisdictional standoff. More devastating still was the presence of Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife veterinarian whose reputation was impeccable and whose testimony would carry weight in any court. "I'm sorry, folks," Marshal Davies said, his tone professionally respectful but unyielding. "We have a federal court order signed by Judge Morrison. The animal and her offspring are to be removed immediately for proper wildlife management." Eleanor felt the world tilt around her. Judge Morrison, Sarah's case. He was the one who declared her legally dead after 7 years. He took my daughter then, and now he's taking Luna. "Mrs. Whitehawk," Dr. Chen said gently, "I understand your attachment, but this animal belongs in a proper wildlife facility. The kittens need specialized care and eventual release to appropriate habitat. Luna needs her family," Eleanor shot back, her voice cracking with desperation. "Look at her. She's dying of stress." "You separate her from us now, and you might as well put a gun to her head." As if to emphasize Eleanor's point, Luna let out another anguished cry, gathering her kittens closer to her body. The tiny creatures were growing weaker by the hour, their small voices becoming more desperate as their mother's distress affected her ability to care for them. The crowd that had supported them the day before had been legally dispersed, leaving only a handful of die-hard supporters who watched helplessly from across the street. The media circus had attracted the wrong kind of attention. Animal rights extremists who had threatened violence, making the federal response seem justified and necessary. "You have 30 minutes to say goodbye," Marshal Davies said, checking his watch. "Then we move." Those 30 minutes felt like 30 seconds and 30 years simultaneously. Eleanor sat with Luna, stroking her fur and whispering the same lullabies she had once sung to Sarah. Robert knelt beside them, his weathered hands gentle as he touched each tiny kitten, memorizing their perfect spotted coats and miniature paws. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered through her tears. "I tried to protect you. I tried so hard." Luna seemed to understand that this was goodbye. She pressed her head against Eleanor's chest, purring softly despite her distress. Then she did something that broke everyone's heart. She picked up one of her kittens, the smallest one with a distinctive white patch on its chest, and placed it gently in Eleanor's lap. "No, sweetheart," Eleanor sobbed. "I can't. You need to stay with your babies." But Luna was insistent, nudging the kitten toward Eleanor with her nose before returning to gather the other two. It was as if she was trying to save at least one of her children by entrusting it to the human who had shown her such love. "She wants you to take the runt," Dr. Chen observed, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. In the wild, mother cats sometimes abandon the weakest kitten to save the stronger ones. "Luna's not abandoning anyone," Eleanor said fiercely, cradling the tiny creature against her chest. "She's making a choice. She's choosing to trust me with her baby." When the tranquilizer dart hit Luna, Eleanor's scream of anguish could be heard 3 blocks away. The bobcat collapsed slowly, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's face, her body still trying to reach toward the kitten in Eleanor's arms even as consciousness faded. "No! You're killing her!" Eleanor lunged forward, but Robert caught her, holding her back as the officers moved in with transport cages. The 2 remaining kittens were crying frantically, their tiny bodies shivering without their mother's warmth. Dr. Chen handled them with professional efficiency, but Eleanor could see the woman's hands shaking as she placed them in a specialized carrier. The mother will be taken to the Federal Wildlife Facility in Colorado, Marshal Davies explained as they loaded Luna's unconscious form into the transport vehicle. The kittens will go to a rehabilitation center in Wyoming until they're old enough for release. Different states, Robert said numbly. You're separating them to different states. It's standard protocol for different age groups, Dr. Chen said, though she couldn't meet their eyes. Eleanor clutched the remaining kitten to her chest, feeling its rapid heartbeat against her palm. This tiny creature was all that remained of the miracle that had brought light back into their lives, and she could already feel it weakening without its mother's care. "What about this one?" she asked desperately. "Wildlife regulations are clear," Blackwood said coldly, reaching for the kitten. "All offspring must be—" "Actually, Dr. Chen interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. "This kitten appears to be suffering from failure to thrive syndrome. It would likely not survive transport in its current condition. Immediate medical intervention is required." Eleanor looked at the veterinarian with sudden understanding. Dr. Chen was giving her a chance, a small window of hope. "I'm a retired nurse," Eleanor said quickly. "I could provide the medical care it needs." "That would be irregular," Marshal Davies said slowly. "But if a licensed veterinarian determines the animal requires immediate medical intervention—" Dr. Chen nodded decisively. "I'm prescribing intensive care for this kitten. Mrs. Whitehawk, you'll need to bottle feed every 2 hours, maintain body temperature, and provide round-the-clock monitoring. Any decline in condition must be reported immediately." As the transport vehicles pulled away, taking Luna and her other babies toward an uncertain future, Eleanor held the surviving kitten close to her heart. It was smaller than her fist, impossibly fragile, but alive, Luna's final gift to the woman who had loved her like a daughter. "What do we call her?" Robert asked softly, his voice hoarse from the day's trauma. Eleanor looked down at the white patch on the kitten's chest, shaped exactly like a heart. "Hope," she whispered. "We call her Hope." The truth began to unravel 3 weeks later, when Sarah Chen could no longer sleep at night. The wildlife veterinarian had been haunted by the Whitehawk case, unable to shake the image of Luna's desperate eyes as the tranquilizer took effect. Something about Blackwood's behavior had troubled her from the beginning. His eagerness to separate the family, his refusal to consider alternatives, his almost personal vendetta against this particular animal. Dr. Chen had spent her career in wildlife management, and she knew the difference between following protocol and pursuing a personal agenda. So she began to dig. Her first discovery came through veterinary records. The Mountain Vista Exotic Ranch that Dr. Clearwater had mentioned wasn't just a breeding facility. It was a front for something much darker. Chen's contacts in federal wildlife enforcement confirmed what she suspected: canned hunting operations, where wealthy clients paid enormous sums to kill captive-bred animals in enclosed spaces. But the deeper she dug, the more horrifying the truth became. Marcus Blackwood hadn't just been investigating the ranch, he had been one of its primary clients. The financial records were damning. Monthly payments of $10,000 from Blackwood's personal accounts to Mountain Vista Exotic Ranch, dating back 5 years. Credit card receipts for hunting equipment, trophy preparation, taxidermy services. Photos found in the ranch's files showed Blackwood posing with dead bobcats, lynx, and other wildcats, his smile cold and triumphant. Chen's hands shook as she scrolled through the evidence. Blackwood had been using his position as a federal warden to identify escaped exotic animals, then either recapturing them for the hunting operation or eliminating them to cover his tracks. Luna hadn't been a threat to public safety. She had been a witness to his crimes. The ranch's owner, Vincent Caraway, had kept meticulous records as insurance against his wealthy clients. In case of investigation, he wanted leverage. Among his files, Chen found something that made her blood run cold. A breeding log that listed Luna by her identification number, along with documentation of her forced breeding with multiple males. Luna hadn't chosen to become pregnant. She had been systematically raped as part of the ranch's breeding program, her kittens destined for the killing floors of canned hunt operations. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. Chen found correspondence between Blackwood and Caraway discussing the Timothy problem. The emails revealed that Blackwood's son had discovered his father's involvement in the hunting operation and threatened to expose him. The boy had been horrified to learn that his father, who preached conservation and wildlife protection, was actually participating in their systematic slaughter. Timothy Blackwood hadn't been killed by a wild bobcat in a random attack. He had been murdered by his own father during a confrontation at the ranch, then fed to the captive cats to destroy the evidence. The wild attack story had been an elaborate cover-up, complete with planted evidence and falsified reports. Chen sat in her office at 2 a.m., staring at the computer screen with tears streaming down her face. An 8-year-old boy had been killed by the man who was supposed to protect him, and that same man had been using federal resources to hunt down the innocent animals who had witnessed his crimes. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers and dialed the FBI. Meanwhile, Eleanor was fighting her own battle to save Hope. The tiny kitten was barely clinging to life, her small body struggling with the trauma of separation from her mother and siblings. Eleanor hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in weeks, feeding Hope every 90 minutes with a specialized bottle, monitoring her temperature, administering medications prescribed by Dr. Clearwater. Robert watched his wife with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. Eleanor had thrown herself into caring for Hope with the fierce dedication of a mother protecting her last remaining child. She talked to the kitten constantly, singing the same lullabies she had once sung to Sarah, telling stories about the adventures they would have when Hope was stronger. "She's going to make it," Eleanor whispered during one of Hope's particularly difficult nights, when the kitten's breathing had become labored and irregular. "She has to make it. Luna trusted me to save her." But Hope was fading. Dr. Clearwater's visits became more frequent, her expressions increasingly grave. The kitten needed her mother's milk, needed the warmth and security of her family. No amount of human care could fully replace what had been torn away from her. It was during one of Hope's worst episodes that the FBI arrived at their door. Agent Maria Rodriguez was a small woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried quiet authority. She sat in their living room, Hope nestled in Eleanor's arms, and delivered news that changed everything. "Mrs. Whitehawk, Mr. Whitehawk, I need to tell you about Marcus Blackwood, and I need to tell you about your Luna." The story that emerged was one of corruption, murder, and systematic animal abuse, spanning multiple states and involving some of the wealthiest families in America. Blackwood had been using his federal position to supply animals for illegal hunting operations, eliminating witnesses and covering his tracks with fabricated reports and false accusations. "Yes, Luna was never wild," Agent Rodriguez explained gently. "She was born in captivity, raised by humans until she was old enough to breed. The ranch's records show she was artificially inseminated multiple times, forced to produce litters for the hunting industry." Eleanor's arms tightened around Hope, her heart breaking for Luna and all the other animals who had suffered in silence. "Where is she now? Where did they take her?" "That's complicated," Rodriguez said carefully. "The facility in Colorado was actually another front for Blackwood's operation. When our agents raided it yesterday, they found Luna in a cage scheduled for a hunt this weekend. She had been sold to a client who specifically requested a tame kill, an animal that wouldn't fight back." Robert's face went white with rage. "They were going to murder her." "Luna is safe now," Rodriguez assured them quickly. She's in federal protective custody at a legitimate wildlife sanctuary in California. But she's not doing well. The separation from her remaining kittens, the stress of captivity, the trauma of everything she's endured, the veterinarians aren't sure she'll recover. Eleanor stood suddenly, hope still cradled in her arms. I need to see her. She needs to know we didn't abandon her. She needs to know Hope is alive. Mrs. Whitehawk, that's not standard protocol. I don't care about protocol. Eleanor's voice carried 40 years of accumulated grief and fury. Luna came to us when she needed a family. She trusted us with her baby. The least we can do is let her know that trust wasn't misplaced. Agent Rodriguez studied Eleanor's face, seeing something there that reminded her of her own grandmother, a steel core wrapped in gentle compassion, a woman who had endured unimaginable loss and somehow found the strength to keep loving. There might be a way, she said slowly. Dr. Chen has been working with us on this case. She has authorization to transport Hope for specialized veterinary care. If Hope needed to be evaluated at the same facility where Luna is being held, Eleanor felt tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. Thank you. Thank you for giving us a chance to be a family again. The truth about Blackwood's crimes had made national news within hours of his arrest. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Dozens of federal employees involved, hundreds of animals killed, millions of dollars in illegal hunting fees. The story dominated headlines for weeks, with Luna becoming a symbol of resilience and survival in the face of systematic abuse. But for Eleanor and Robert, the media attention meant something much simpler: vindication. They hadn't been crazy or delusional. They had recognized something pure and innocent in Luna, and they had been right to protect her. As they prepared for the trip to California, Eleanor packed Sarah's old blanket, the one Luna had slept with those first precious nights in their home. Hope was stronger now, stable enough for travel, though still fragile and requiring constant care. "Do you think Luna will remember us?" Robert asked as they loaded their car for the long drive west. Eleanor looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, then back at their house where Luna had first found sanctuary. "Mothers don't forget their children," she said softly, "and children don't forget the mothers who choose to love them." The drive to California would take 14 hours, but Eleanor didn't care. They were going home, not to a place, but to each other, to the family that trauma had scattered and love would reunite. The moment Luna's eyes met Hope's tiny form, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The listless, defeated creature who had been slowly dying of grief suddenly came alive with a mother's desperate joy. She struggled to her feet, her body shaking with weakness from weeks of refusing food, but her golden eyes blazed with renewed purpose as she moved toward the enclosure barrier with an urgency that took everyone's breath away. Eleanor felt her knees go weak as she watched Luna's reaction. The Bobcat's entire body language changed in an instant, from the hollow despair of an animal who had given up on life to the fierce, protective energy of a mother reuniting with her child. Luna pressed herself against the mesh barrier, her nose trying desperately to reach through to Hope, making soft chirping sounds that were heartbreakingly tender. "Can I bring Hope inside?" Eleanor asked Dr. Martinez, her voice thick with tears. "Please. Luna needs to touch her baby, Doctor." Martinez hesitated, glancing at Agent Rodriguez, who had accompanied them from San Francisco. The FBI agent nodded slowly. "Given the extraordinary circumstances and the evidence we've uncovered about Blackwood's crimes, I think we can make an exception to standard protocol." The security procedures seemed to take forever. Airlocks and safety briefings and liability waivers, while Luna paced anxiously just yards away, her eyes never leaving the carrier that held her precious, surviving kitten. When Eleanor finally entered the enclosure with Hope, the reunion was almost too beautiful to witness. Luna approached with careful reverence, as if she couldn't quite believe Hope was real and alive and here. She sniffed delicately at her daughter, then began the thorough grooming process that had been interrupted 3 weeks ago by tranquilizer darts and federal agents. Hope responded instinctively, pressing close to her mother's warmth and purring with a contentment that spoke of profound relief. But Luna wasn't finished with her reunion. After ensuring Hope was clean and safe, she turned her attention to Eleanor, approaching the woman who had saved her daughter's life. The great cat pressed her head against Eleanor's chest, purring with a depth of emotion that transcended species boundaries. Her golden eyes, so hollow and lifeless just moments before, now shone with gratitude and recognition. "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered, stroking Luna's fur with trembling hands. "I missed you, too. I never wanted them to take you away. Hope needed you so much." Robert watched from outside the enclosure, his own tears flowing freely as he witnessed the profound bond between his wife and the animal who had become their daughter. Dr. Martinez stood beside him, shaking her head in amazement. "I've been working with wildlife for 25 years, she said softly, "and I've never seen anything like this. Luna's recovery is immediate and complete. It's as if Eleanor and Hope gave her back her will to live." Agent Rodriguez was documenting everything with her camera, knowing that this reunion would become crucial evidence in the ongoing federal investigation. But even her professional objectivity was moved by the scene unfolding in the enclosure. The sanctuary would be willing to continue housing Luna and Hope here, Dr. Martinez explained to Robert. But given what we've learned about the corruption in the federal system and the public attention this case has received, there might be other options. "What kind of other options?" Robert asked, though he was afraid to hope. "The Blackwood scandal has prompted a complete review of federal wildlife policies," Agent Rodriguez said, joining the conversation. "There's growing support in Washington for allowing certain animals rescued from illegal operations to be placed in specialized private care when release into the wild isn't viable." Eleanor's heart leaped with possibility, but she forced herself to stay grounded. They had been through too much heartbreak to let Hope run away with them again. Over the next hour, they watched Luna's remarkable recovery unfold in real time. The sanctuary staff brought food, and for the first time in weeks, Luna ate with genuine hunger, devouring everything offered while keeping Hope close to her side. She played gently with her kitten, teaching important survival lessons through mock hunting games. Most remarkably, she seemed to understand that Eleanor and Robert were part of her family structure, including them in her territorial behavior and seeking their attention when Hope was napping. "There's something else you need to know," Agent Rodriguez said as they prepared to leave for the day. "The investigation has revealed that Luna had 2 other kittens who were separated from her during the initial seizure. They're currently at a rehabilitation facility in Wyoming, and they're doing well." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "2 more babies? Luna has 2 more children out there?" "Based on the evidence we've gathered about Blackwood's operation, we believe we can arrange for them to be transferred here within the week. It would complete the family reunion that should never have been interrupted in the first place." That evening, as they sat in their hotel room making plans to extend their stay in California, Eleanor reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. 4 weeks ago, they had been 2 lonely seniors living in a house that had become a museum to their grief. Now they were fighting federal bureaucracy for the right to raise a family of rescued bobcats who had chosen them as surely as they had chosen the cats. "Do you think we can really bring them home to Montana?" Eleanor asked Robert as they watched the local news coverage of the Blackwood corruption scandal. "I think," Robert said slowly, "that after everything we've been through, after everything Luna has survived, the universe owes us this miracle. And I think there are enough people in power who agree with us to make it happen." The next morning brought news that changed everything. Dr. Martinez met them at the sanctuary entrance with barely contained excitement, Agent Rodriguez beside her with official documents in hand. "The Justice Department has just issued a special directive," Rodriguez announced, establishing a new category for animals rescued from federal corruption cases. Luna and her kittens are being granted protected witness status, which allows them to be placed in specialized private care with proper oversight. Eleanor felt her knees buckle with relief and joy. "Does that mean—" "It means you can take them home," Dr. Martinez said with a broad smile. "Your property will need to be modified to federal standards for exotic animal care, and you'll need to complete certification as specialized caregivers. But yes, Luna and all 3 of her kittens can come home to Montana." The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and planning. Contractors would begin work on their property immediately, building secure but comfortable enclosures that would allow the cats to live safely while maintaining their bond with Eleanor and Robert. Veterinary protocols were established, inspection schedules arranged, and legal guardianship papers signed. But the most emotional moment came when Luna's 2 other kittens arrived from Wyoming. They were healthy and strong, having been well cared for during their separation, but their reunion with Luna was as heart-wrenching as Hope's had been. The mother cat seemed to count her babies obsessively for the first hour, as if she couldn't quite believe they were all safe and together again. Eleanor named the second kitten Sarah in honor of their lost daughter, and the third Max in memory of their faithful German shepherd, who had first accepted Luna into their home. The symbolism felt perfect. Their old grief transformed into new love, their family expanded rather than replaced. "You know what Sarah would say about all this?" Eleanor asked Robert that evening as they watched Luna settle down for the night with all 3 kittens tucked securely against her side. "What's that?" "She'd say that love doesn't follow rules or regulations or species boundaries. She'd say that sometimes the best families are the ones that choose each other against all odds." Eleanor pressed her palm against the enclosure mesh, and Luna immediately came over to nuzzle against it. "She'd say we proved that it's never too late for second chances." Robert nodded, his arm around his wife's shoulders as they prepared to begin the journey back to Montana. Tomorrow, they would start the long drive home, taking their unusual family to the place where Luna had first found sanctuary on their living room sofa. There would be challenges ahead, learning to care for wild animals, navigating ongoing legal requirements, dealing with media attention, but they would face them together. As they walked back toward their hotel, Eleanor could hear Luna's contented purring echoing across the sanctuary. It was the sound of a family reunited, of love that had survived the worst corruption and cruelty could inflict, and of hope that had finally found its way home. Tomorrow, they would begin building their new life together. But tonight, under the California stars, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that miracles really could happen to those brave enough to fight for them. The universe had taken their first daughter 40 years ago, but it had also sent them Luna and her babies when they needed most to remember how to love. Sometimes the greatest gifts came in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes healing looked nothing like what you thought it would. But it was still healing, still hope, still the profound joy of family found against all odds. Dear friends, if this story of Eleanor and Robert has touched your heart, you're not alone. At 59 and 62, they discovered something profound that speaks to every one of us who has reached our golden years. It's never too late to open our hearts to unexpected love. Their willingness to fight federal bureaucracy for Luna and her babies reminds us that the fiercest battles are often fought not for ourselves, but for those who depend on our courage. Eleanor's transformation from a woman living in the shadows of grief to someone radiating maternal purpose shows us that our capacity for joy doesn't diminish with age, it deepens with wisdom. When society tells us our best years are behind us, Luna's story whispers a different truth, that the most meaningful chapters of our lives might still be unwritten. Robert's sacrifice of material possessions for love's sake reflects the beautiful clarity that comes with maturity, knowing what truly matters. Their empty nest became full again, not through conventional means, but through the radical act of saying yes to love when it appeared in wild, spotted packages. Sometimes the family we need most arrives when we least expect it, asking us to be braver than we ever imagined possible. What unexpected source of joy has transformed your golden years in ways you never anticipated? Have you ever had to choose between following society's rules and following your heart's calling? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story of late-life transformation might be exactly what another reader needs to hear today. Let's celebrate the beautiful truth that our greatest adventures often begin after 50.